Welcome to Trusting After Trauma, Season 5, Finding Freedom After Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Pi Venus Winslow. Our goal is to provide information and resources to educate and empower viewers to recover from childhood trauma and narcissistic abuse so they can reclaim their health, happiness, and personal power. Our speakers specialize in supporting others through their unique expertise and offer valuable insights, tools, and inspiration for viewers to find the courage and motivation to change their lives. I'm super excited to have Wendy Bahari here with us today. With 25 plus years of professional experience and advanced level certifications, Wendy Bahari is the founder and director of the Cognitive Therapy Center of New Jersey and the Schema Therapy Institutes of New Jersey, New York City, and DC. She has been treating clients, training professionals, and supervising psychotherapists for more than 25 years. Wendy was on the faculty of the Cognitive Therapy Center and Schema Therapy Institute of New York until those institutes merged in 2012, where she trained and worked with Dr. Jeffrey Young since 1989. She is a founding fellow and consulting supervisor for the Academy of Cognitive Therapy, Aaron T. Beck's Institute. Wendy serves as the president of the executive board and International Society of Schema Therapy from 2010 to 2014 and serving as the training and certification coordinator for the ISST executive board from 2008 to 2010. She's currently on the chair of the Schema Therapy Development Program Subcommittee for the ISST. Wendy Bahari has co-authored several chapters and articles on schema therapy and cognitive therapy. She is the author of an international best-selling book, Disarming the Narcissist, and that's been translated into 16 languages. The third edition was only recently released and was selected by Oprah Daily as one of the top books on the subject of narcissism. Wendy has a specialty in treating narcissists and the people who live with and deal with them. As an author and subject matter expert on narcissism, she is a contributing chapter author of several chapters on schema therapy for narcissism for professional readers. She lectures both nationally and internationally to professional and general audiences on schema therapy, narcissism, interpersonal relationships, anger, and dealing with difficult people. She receives consistent high praise for her clear and articulate teaching style and her ability to bring the therapy to life through dramatic demonstrations of client interactions in the treatment room. Her work industry business speaking engagements focus on interpersonal conflict resolution. Her private practice is primarily devoted to treating narcissists, partners, people dealing with them, and couples experiencing relationship problems. So welcome, Wendy. Thanks so much for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be with you, Pi. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So the work you do is fascinating. And I think it's fascinating the fact that you're treating people with narcissism. So we're currently in, like, narcissism is becoming a very, very well-known and talked about topic. And we're definitely in an era of narcissism. And you talk about this in your book. So if we're to deal with narcissists in our lives, we need to understand what narcissism is and how it arises. So can you give us a picture of a narcissist?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's out there for sure. There's everything. Everything is narcissism these days. It's become quite a hot topic for good reason, I think, too, because it has allowed so many to become clear about what it is that they have been dealing with, perhaps all of their lives, or even more acutely, and why they feel so turned around, so upside down, so unsure of themselves, so self-doubting and self-diminishing. It has powerful damaging effects on those around them. And you know that for sure, given all the work you've done in this area. we think about, I like to debunk the myths, Pi, because I think there's a lot of myths out there about narcissism. Unfortunately, popular culture sometimes gets into the bad habit of calling everyone a narcissist if you spend just 2 minutes talking about yourself, which is not narcissism. It is. You also said a very important word, and that's the word understand. And for everyone listening, I think the greatest gift you can give yourself when you're dealing with this issue is to become very familiar with what it means, what it's about, what it's rooted in, how it evolves. And you might think, I don't want to spend all my time thinking about this and understanding it. That's not my job. It isn't your job, but it is the burden you carry when you don't understand, that you run the risk of doubting yourself, blaming yourself, taking too much responsibility, because narcissists are so good of laying that on. So, what is a narcissist? Well, the term narcissist comes out of the broader term narcissistic personality disorder, which is more the clinical terminology that we refer to. And I like to say that it's a syndrome, or it's a personality that happens along a spectrum from the more benign to the more severe. We're all sort of familiar with the caricature type of narcissism, the very arrogant, grandiose, boastful, blustery, boisterous, look at me, I'm wonderful, this grandiose, entitled type. But there's another type that also hides in plain sight and can be sometimes even more difficult for individuals to deal with, and that's the covert type. And that's being talked about a lot more these days, covert narcissism, which is I'm the victim. Nobody appreciates me. Nobody recognizes all of my contributions. Poor me. And you just don't get me. And you're always disappointed in me. And you don't know how good you have it. And those are the kinds of phrases and the kind of language that you will bump up against with a covert narcissist. Their super extraordinariness, because narcissists need to be super extraordinary, comes from their suffering. I write about them as the super sufferers, the virtuous victims. They're always doing more than everybody else. And you'll find this a lot, certainly with men, but especially with narcissistic women, where they're sometimes call it their kind of diva-esque, but also very martyrish way of showing up in the world becomes prominent around their children, around their family, around dealing with their partners. And for therapists, it's a tricky issue. It gets often missed and not marked as narcissism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that you touched on the covert side of narcissism, which is definitely something that that I've been recognizing a little more recently, and hadn't really made that connection. And so I'm wondering is there a difference between male narcissism and female narcissism? There's the traits, definitely, but is there certain aspects to the genders there that are different?
I do. It's a very important and popular question, and I think that what we find is, while there are plenty of women who can give their male counterparts a run for their money, right? They can be just as arrogant, controlling, and grandiose as a male narcissist can be, but you're more likely to find them in that covert version. They appear to be what we call in a state of vulnerability, because they can weep and they can be very upset, and what are you doing to me, and I can't take it, and I'm just trying to help. And so you get a lot of that, and it feels vulnerable. It feels very fragile. There is a fragility there because they're all wounded underneath. Mm-hmm. So many, some of them were just terribly indulged without consequences and limits, but most of these narcissistic types have some deep wounds. And I don't say that for anybody to feel sorry for them. It's just more a matter, again, of going back to the idea of understanding and making sense out of it. Because the more you can make sense out of it, then you can connect the dots and see that this led to this, led to this. And why do they do that? Well, this is why they do that. This is how it shows up. But I think you're more likely to see this kind of covert controlling, more I'm the victim, you have no idea. I mean, I'll give you an example, of a very real client who would say to me things like, you couldn't understand this, Wendy. You couldn't possibly understand this. I mean, I have put up with more than any human being on this planet. What I tolerate every day, like I should get a trophy for that. You have no idea. And I try to counter with, oh, it just sounds very hard, but maybe no, it is what it is, right? So there's kind of like no penetrating that identity. And it is an identity of sorts, in the same way that for the grandiose, blustery types, it's name dropping and look at my $5,000 Versace suit and the car that I just bought and my job and my promotion and the money that I make. It's an identity. And it's all about the preservation of a very special ego. Because at the core, there's so much inadequacy, insecurity, and damage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting as you're talking about it, I'm reflecting upon like my own experience with female narcissism is coming from my mother and my grandmother, and we'll talk about that too, but I can see the pattern of martyrdom being passed down. I'm like yes, I give so much, and and I'm so unappreciated, and I'm so,
yes,
what I sacrifice,
There's also the pressure that can come from a narcissistic mom, certainly from narcissistic dads too. But I've had many of my clients describe that kind of suffocating pressure that came from living with a parent who was living vicariously through them. So they will describe, I was truly the trophy child. I should have turned into a narcissist myself because I was living the life that my mother needed me to live so she could shine. So it was literally like carrying the spotlight around to shine it on my mother with every action, word, song, piece of art, sport that I participated in. And so there is also that kind of enmeshed way of living with a parent who has these narcissistic traits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting. You should talk about that. Because I've seen it in the women in my family. I had an experience with an aunt who appeared to have that kind of relationship with her daughter, but my mother daughter relationship was, my mother didn't live vicarious through me succeeding. She didn't want me to succeed. So she would sabotage me because it took the light away from her.
Yes,
she wanted her accomplishments to shine, so she would diminish mine. Whereas I had an aunt who really thrived on her daughter's accomplishments.
Yes, it's an important point. The other side of the coin, right? That certain competition that can also come among a narcissistic parent and their child. Like, I've heard countless stories, a lot of them with these are male narcissistic men that I have treated. And we talk a lot about generational narcissism and the legacy of narcissism and how to break the spell, because they are in treatment as their parents and grandparents weren't. They are actually seeking treatment, or they were kind of forced to come to treatment or else, but they're there. And so we look at ways in which the parent was competitive with them, literally always trying to show them up and always trying to maintain that kind of first place priority.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. I can go down a lot of rabbit holes on this subject, but I want to talk about narcissism and self-esteem, because I think that's really important. Like you were saying, not everybody who talks about themselves for a little while is a narcissistic. So what's the difference between self-esteem, confidence, and narcissism?
I think when one has healthy self-esteem and a healthy sense of confidence, that it's not a means for compensating for some underlying insecurity. So I don't have to go out of my way to prove myself in order to have value. I don't have to win you over. I don't have to show up in this kind of bold beating my chest. I'm so sure of myself. Look at me and all I can do. And my whole list of, people I know and things I've done, most of that is in the spirit of trying to feel a sense of value and worth. So it's what we think of as a mask or a facade or an overcompensation for a deeper level of insecurity. And you can't always tell right up front, which is why a lot of people get a little hoodwinked into being in these relationships until it becomes really clear that this is a pattern. And it's a pattern that forgoes this idea of healthy, adaptive ways of living in the world. A healthy person feels a certain degree of confidence, balanced by certain degrees of, very openly expressed curiosities, insecurities, asking for help, that kind of dependent, interdependent, counterdependent ways of living, right? That balance between connection and autonomy. The narcissist is hyper autonomous. Right? It's constantly about competing and performing and showing up and winning approval and being recognized. So they can look, and some of them are incredibly confident because they have achieved. They've spent their lives in the arena of performance. They tend to be bright. They achieve well. No doubt many of them end up in leadership positions, and they do feel a certain authentic confidence, but it's like running on a hamster wheel. There's no stopping. There's no engaging in real intimacy or vulnerability or open emotional expressiveness. So the balance is really off.
So let's talk about, let's move into narcissism in like families, right? Like, is it genetic? Because I can see a pattern of these traits in my family dynamics and how my grandmother was, and then my mother and her sisters, and even myself to an extent before I started educating myself, which is why it's important to understand what it is and recognize like I when I figured it out and I made some connections, I'm like, ooh, I need to change some things about myself. Clearly my self-esteem is low. And where do I find the balance between confidence and needing external approval? So that was me working through my own issues around narcissism, because that was what was modeled for me. Is narcissism genetic? And if it is there an opportunity for people to shift out of narcissistic tendencies and traits?
That's a great question. There's something else you just said, if I might just step over there for 1 second, because it's an important distinction between the first thing I said and what you just said, which is that there are certainly plenty of people who will compensate for insecurities who are not narcissistic. So we have to talk about that real kind of hallmark element that differentiates narcissism from others who may behave in those ways. And that is that others who are compensating for their insecurities can also share the stage with another human, right? There's time to take in the life of another. For the narcissist, there isn't so much. I mean, they're incredibly self-absorbed. So self-absorbed is one very important element. And the second thing is entitled. They feel completely entitled to do what they do. They don't necessarily act intentionally to hurt someone, but they will hurt you nonetheless. They are doing it, again, in the spirit of preserving their own ego. And so they will hurt you. There's no doubt about it. It will be sometimes revenge. It'll be sometimes just stomping all over you to get that golden ticket. But it's because and I'm not making excuses for it, because hurtful is hurtful no matter what the motivational driver is. They will hurt you, but it's often, again, in the spirit of preserving that ego, and they don't have remorse for it because they feel entitled. They justify, they rationalize, they defend. Going back to your other question, though, is it inherited? There's very new, very recent data that suggests that maybe there are certain traits, biological traits, that one can come into the world with that can evolve into a more narcissistic type of personality. But I still think it can't stand alone without some experiences in the environment. So I still think it's a nature nurture thing. I mean, from my experience, and it's, 30 years of treating mostly narcissistic men, some narcissistic women, and a lot of partners and family members. But my experience with the narcissist has been that usually there's a sensitive temperament. So you think about a child who comes to the world with a very sensitive temperament. Maybe a certain impulsivity might be another trait that gets passed along. And because of that kind of impulsivity and sensitivity, if you're meeting an environment that can't handle that, an environment that doesn't provide going that little extra mile to give the child the kind of unconditional love and attention and affection that they really need, to set the limits. I mean, a good parent is always setting limits, but really attending without assassinating the character of the child, without causing that kind of toxic shame that narcissists so often experience because of their impulsive actions. I do think that a lot has to do with what you bring and then the environment you meet when you get here. And I do think even when you look at generations, you're going to find that there were certain behavioral patterns that just continued to flourish, right? Mimicry and monkey see, monkey do from one generation to the next.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think narcissists lack empathy? That's one of the prime characteristics of narcissism, is not having empathy for other people. So do you think what are the why do they lack empathy, and more importantly, do you think a lack of empathy in these patterns of child rearing, do you think that ties in as well?
It's a really good observation. I do think that a lack of empathy in child rearing is a part of the explanation. So they're not seeing it, it's not being modeled for them because they often lack that unconditional love. The love is very conditioned. So it's not a kind of deep diving curiosity into the world of that little one. What makes you tick? What are you all about? What do you want? What matters to you? It's usually, this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to be, this is how it's going to happen. And so that's one part of it. I think the other part is, and it's just a anecdotal, let's call it a speculation on my part from my work, is not that they lack a capacity for empathy, but they lack an expression of empathy. I mean, when we think about how fast the brain processes information, it is so rapid fast. The way we are constantly interpreting and attaching meaning to every experience, everything that lights up our senses, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's fast. And I think for narcissists, because they are so focused, so self-absorbed, and so focused on how am I doing? How am I showing up? What are you thinking about me? Are you trying to use me? Are you trying to manipulate me? Are you trying to judge me? What do you want from me? What's up with you? You want to control me? You're trying to control me, aren't you? You're not appreciating me. It's a constant meaning-making machine. And they don't even know it. It's become so automatically programmed. And because it's just such a self-absorbed focus with no real understanding of their own internal narrative, they don't even have the empathy. And let's remember, empathy is not compassion, right? Empathy is understanding. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to console it. You don't have to endorse it. It's just understanding. They don't even have that rich, deep understanding of their own narrative. How can they understand the inner life of another? They look at your face and see you looking disappointed, and it's a flash, probably less than a second, of an appreciation for the fact that they've done something wrong. And faster than that, they are already defending against it, justifying and blaming you for it. Well, if you just wouldn't always make that face, you're always asking for something. You'd never appreciate anything that I do. There you go again. What did I do now? Oh, kill me. I'm the worst person in the world. Poor you. And it comes like bullets. Mm-hmm. It can come like that because they're in this very ferocious state of defending and deflecting and devaluing and dismissing and denying and all those D words, right? Instead of in that slowed down way, like we try to do in therapy, where they can see that, oh, that was triggering. That made me feel ashamed. Oh, I didn't show up on time. I hurt her feelings. I'm late again. There I go again. I got to own this, right? That's what a healthy person does. And that's
Yes.
the journey to health that we try to work with the narcissist, believe it or not.
Oh, I believe it. And so something that you were just saying, which I think is really important, is accountability
Mm.
and responsibility.
Mhm.
So connecting with if our behavior is impacted another person and acknowledging how they're experiencing it and owning what's happened, our own behavior, our own actions, which is another
Yes,
thing that narcissists are not able to do.
right, right. Because of that deep, dark demon underneath, which is their toxic shame, their sense of insecurity, their constant need to compete and to win and to
Mhm.
be the best. Because the alternative is so unbearable. It sounds so ridiculous sometimes, just listening to it, thinking, yeah, what's the big deal? You just own it. You say you're sorry. You really own it. You try to imagine stepping into the experience of the other, and you can feel like the pain that you've caused, and you just try to make amends. What's so hard about that? Well, it sounds easy, and people who don't have issues of narcissism get it, and people who are dealing with, living with, or growing up with narcissists really get it because they've spent their life being over responsible for things that they shouldn't be taking responsibility for. Narcissists are just constantly trying to protect against, feeling that unbearable shame. It's not the shame that you or I might feel if we hurt somebody's feelings. It might be like, ooh, I blew it. Oh, that must have really felt bad when I forgot about you on your special day. I'd really like to make that up to you because I could imagine that must have been hurtful, right? We can imagine the experience of the other. That's empathy. We can own it. We're not beating ourselves up, but we feel like maybe we need to make amends. We need to do the right thing. We need to be a little more careful and thoughtful. Doesn't happen in the world of the narcissist, not because they're just cruel and callous, and not because they get pleasure out of doing things that are mean spirited, but because they are so busy taking care of that, protecting that part of themselves
Mhm.
from being the bad guy,
Mhm.
from being the bad guy. When you know that you're fine, you're not perfect, nobody's perfect, but when you know you're fine, you're lovable, you're acceptable, you're a good human, you make mistakes, then there's nothing to defend, right? There's nothing to defend. You're free to own. You're free to own your self-esteem, and you're free to own your mistakes, your strengths and your struggles, right?
Mhm.
Not true for the narcissist. They're not free.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And you touched on something just now where you said where people who live with narcissists or have narcissistic partners take on more than they should. So can you talk a little bit about the dynamic, that underlying dynamic between a narcissist? You describe in your book, I think, that it's much like a lock and a key. So can you
Mm-hmm.
explain the qualities of someone who attracts narcissists or is triggered
Yeah.
by them?
Yeah. I love this question, Pi, because it's it's a big question among probably a lot of people in your audience and just people in general.
Mm-hmm.
I say it's the perfect dysfunctional fit in many cases. Unfortunately, I mean, fortunately for the narcissist, they are often getting they get the bonus, they get the gift because they're often getting someone who is very self-sacrificing, very subjugating of their own opinions and desires and wishes, very willing to give in, very willing to submit, very willing to take full ownership and responsibility until it can't anymore, right? No one is immune to being attracted to a narcissist. They can be charming, they can be smart, they can be funny, they can be successful. No one is immune. And if you grew up with one, there's a certain kind of habit formation that takes place, something familiar. We gravitate to the familiar. We don't even recognize that it's problematic until you're kind of in the thick of it. So that happens too.
Mm-hmm.
But no one's immune. I think the question becomes those who tend to stay, and those who tend to stay when there is no chance of resolving reconciling the conflict. The narcissist has no willingness to enter into therapy, do anything about it. We have to look at the choice, that choice. And is it a choice, or is it more of a default function that comes out of fear of the alternative, having been so battered, maybe not physically, but emotionally and mentally, by the ideas that, where are you going to go? Who's going to want you? You'll never have anything. I'll take the kids away from you. If it's partners. So it's so easy if you're someone who has this very self-sacrificing part of you, you tend towards subjugating your voice, your opinions, your thoughts, your needs, your desires. You're not quick to express them out of fear of judgment or abandonment or rejection or abuse, or, you tend to go quiet. It's a great fit for a narcissist because they get to be king of the hill, right? They get to have what they want when they want it. They get to devalue you when things go wrong, and you own it, sadly, sometimes with great depression and anxiety, but you own it. So that makeup is not, that dynamic, I should say, is not that unusual to find. And I say they get the gift because they're typically getting someone who does have this enormous power of loving them despite all of their prickly, hurtful behaviors. I mean, fortunately for me, I've seen over the years narcissistic individuals who have gone on to heal, who have gone on to adapt their behaviors to healthy ones. I've seen relationships that, fortunately, the partner was still hanging in there long enough that, as the healing took place and behaviors were changing, the narcissist is finally awakened to the fact, like, I have a really amazing partner. But sadly, that doesn't happen most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So if somebody finds themselves in a relationship, in a close relationship with a narcissist, whether it's a romantic partner, maybe another family member, a parent, or another family member, where does the person who's experiencing abuse from the narcissist, where is their leverage? How do they know? How do they know how to leverage their power? And like when do they know? When do they know to give up? When is enough? When is enough enough? How do they figure it out?
Another great question. And I spend so much of my time coaching people in this particular area, which is, how do I know when to stay, when to leave, what to do, what will work, will it work, do I have leverage? Sadly, a lot of people don't realize how much leverage they actually do have, because here's the thing, narcissists don't tend to leave unless they've already lined up somebody else, or they have this big entourage of fans and followers. They don't leave because they're lonely people. I mean, narcissists don't usually have good friends. They may have a fan following, but they don't have great, intimate, close friends. So they're lonely folks. They're lonely from the time they're very little. And so chances are they're not going anywhere. And the threat of losing you can be the very leverage that might set it up so they might seek help. If you're looking to try to see if there's room for restoration of something, if there ever was anything healthy, but to form a healthy connection. That question of, stay or go, and do I have leverage? Even when you test your leverage and you see that you might have some, there may not be a readiness for going. There's many women I have an online community called Loving, Leaving, and Living with the Narcissist in Your Life. And so many, mostly women, some men, but mostly women in my community who will say, I'm not ready to leave. I'm not ready to leave my children in the company or the custody of someone who doesn't, keep an eye on them, who drinks and drives, who, doesn't believe in car seats and seatbelts and nutritious food, or staying off screens all day long, or doesn't watch what they're looking at on the internet. So they feel a great deal of protection for their children, and they may be more willing, but it's a deliberate, conscious decision. So a lot of what I say to people who are asking or struggling with this question of what do I do? How do I know when it's right? Is that there is no right or wrong answer to this, but there is that thing called choice and default. And I say, just wake up every day and make a decision that day. Make a decision that day. This is my decision today. I'm too scared. Okay. I'm not ready because of the financial consequences that will befall me and my children. Okay. I'm not ready because of the dangers to my children. Okay. I'm not ready because I love this person and I want to see what's possible. Maybe I'm crazy, but I love them. I see a vulnerability. I want to see if it can be fixed. Okay. Let's not judge people who choose whatever they choose, as long as they're choosing, right? You're standing on that platform of your healthy, wise adult self, and you're looking at your options thoughtfully, and you're making a choice, and you may choose differently that night. You may choose differently tomorrow or the next day or next year, but it's your right to choose. Just make sure that your voice is speaking, at least to you right now. And then eventually is speaking out loud, because there are really beautiful ways that you can speak to the narcissist and even be heard. There are ways.
Mm-hmm. Can you touch really briefly on that? How do you speak to a narcissist and be heard?
Yeah, it's a skill called empathic confrontation, a skill that I teach to therapists and a skill that I teach to everyday folks, because I think it's such a beautiful skill. It's one I didn't come up with it, but I elaborated it in the work of schema therapy. And empathic confrontation is just simply everything you know about a person, right? Sort of sets the stage like a prelude to the confrontation. We are all somewhat confrontation avoidant. It's not fun to confront, and it's hard to confront narcissists. You know, you're likely to get a backlash, or you're likely to get the door in your face, or you're going to get ignored. But the beauty of it is you can never lose when you confront, because it's your voice out loud that you're listening to, that your inner soul, your little self is feeling your own advocacy. It's a win always, no matter what happens over there.
Mm-hmm.
But it can also be a really beautiful thing if what happens over there is they actually hear you and they begin to notice, even if it doesn't change them, you're not going to change them, but you might be able to shave a little of the sharpness off the edges. You might be able to at least get them to be paying a little bit more attention to what you will and will not tolerate. So empathic confrontation goes like this. What do we know about narcissists? They're really sensitive to criticism, right? Everything feels like a criticism. So when you start with, I know this might sound like a criticism, and I know that's what you think I'm always trying to do, is put you down, but my true intention is not to be critical of you. My intention here is really only to let you know that I'm struggling with something. And so I know you don't mean to be hurtful when you talk to me in that tone, but, and here's the confrontation, which is usually the shortest part, but it's not okay with me anymore. It's really hurtful. I don't like it. It feels bad. And I feel like it's just kind of like widening the gap between us. So doesn't mean they're going to say, oh, gee, wow, thanks for saying that. No, usually you get, what, did your therapist tell you to say that? Or, you know, what are you reading now? Or something like that, something cynical, something sarcastic. But don't worry. It's repetition and persistence. Change the dance, change the choreography. This becomes your new way of speaking. It's calm, it's steady, it's sturdy, it's even, it's balanced. You don't have to carry the burden of being angry all the time. You don't have to carry the burden of suppressing your feelings. It's simply, yeah, I know it's important to you. I hear that and I can respect that. But this is what's important to me. So we have to find a middle ground.
Mm-hmm.
Even, right? Prep yourself, take some deep breaths, find a quiet space where you can kind of take your little self from in there, the vulnerable part of you, and put you in a safe place so your healthy, sturdy adult can show up as the voice piece. And if you can't do this face to face, pick up your phone, take your recording app and record it and send it to the narcissist in your life. They will listen to it because the curiosity will get to them. They will listen to it. They may even listen to it again and again. And you can bend and flex your voice so that they can really hear your full intention. That's important for impact. Don't write it, speak it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's very powerful. And what I'm really taking away is that we get to own and we get to speak what is going on with us, whether or not it's actually received on the other end. But I'm also hearing that there is a possibility, what you're saying, it can be, there's a possibility that it can be received.
It's a possibility. Even I've coached a lot of people with narcissistic moms who love to come over and redecorate the house, change the clothes of the children, change everything. And sometimes even words like, Mom, you have a great knack for things. You always did. You have a great sense of style. And I know it's really important to you. You like things the way you like them. So I'm not unappreciative of your effort, and I'm not unappreciative of, your style, but this is my house and I kind of like to do it my way. And so I know it doesn't necessarily meet your approval, but that's the way it has to be when you're coming to visit me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Setting a limit.
Setting a limit.
Yes. So important. Wow. What an amazing conversation we've had today. I'm so grateful for you taking the time to be with us, and you